Yep. Okay, great. Excellent. So I sort of captioned my talk on smartest supply chains for an unpredictable world, because I do think that a lot of the events that are happening right now are have been unpredictable, and especially the impact that it's had on our operations and supply chain. And of course, I mean, I don't need to talk a lot about the disruptions that COVID-19 has had on the world globally, right? But what it has had is an extreme impact on supply chains and operations. So if I just walk through, demand has changed. And when I say demand has changed, it's not as simple as saying, yes, demand has gone up or gone down. Every organization has been hit in a different way, depending on their product portfolio and what has really meant to their different SKUs. For example, even companies like Unilever, P&G have had certain product portfolios, extreme growth in demand, and others an extreme reduction in demand. So it hasn't been like a uniform sort of impact. So that's something that's creating a lot of disruption in the supply chain. And then we've just heard recently on the earnings calls, right, of certain companies like Apple, Microsoft, Google, that was just this week. And we've seen that there's been a massive increase in demand for certain types of products and services, especially in the technology space. So really, demand has been immensely volatile, which has made businesses that respond to this demand quite scrambling and having to have rapid responses to be able to meet that demand, right? So that's one thing. The other thing, which has been the bane of supply chain professionals, right, is the limited visibility across the supply chain. Especially Patrick introduced it very well. We call it the tier N-1, N-2, right, of suppliers. That actually, suppliers to your suppliers and their suppliers. Now, when there's a break in one of those supply chains, then it immediately impacts you. And we're seeing that right now in the semiconductor business, right? Apple, forecasting risk to their products and to their services because of the shortage of semiconductors. So definitely the limited visibility is causing volatility in supply chains. And then, of course, increasing supply chain costs. Patrick mentioned ports being disrupted, containers, container costs are at an all-time high at the moment because of the shortage of containers for shipping. So again, this has resulted in higher supply chain costs. And then if I talk about, there's other risk areas that we've identified, especially with, areas that we hadn't foreseen before that has directly impacted the supply chain: environmental risk, regulatory risk, trade war risk, etc. And then, of course, sustainability has become a lot more of a focus, and with new regulations, especially in Europe, which sort of stipulate that supply chains or suppliers to certain organizations in Europe have to meet these more stringent requirements, means again an impact to supply chain. So again, I mean, this is all not new. I just wanted to highlight that there are multitudes of impact, and they come from different areas. It's not a one size fits all. An impact on the organization and your business may be different depending on where you play, what products you serve, and how your own supply chain is structured. And I saw the invite list for today. There's actually a lot of people from very different industries here today. So I can only speak a little bit generally to address everyone equally. So what does that meant? We know about the challenges. So if I summarize what's happened as a challenge, raw materials, for example, 68% of organizations have had a raw material challenge, right? Demand volatility, I already talked about, 64% demand volatility if we average it across the industries. Supplier responsiveness and communications has been a challenge. How do we identify these suppliers? Where are they in the network, tier N-1, N-2, and how do we communicate with them? And then, I talked about logistics and transportation availability. It's been a massive challenge, together with the logistics challenge of actually identifying, how we can transport, which ports, which companies, shipping versus air, etc. So again, nothing new, but it just shows the extent of the challenge. So just before I start on how, some of the techniques or the frameworks that we can use to make supply chains more resilient, I think it'll be worth, doing a poll. Let me just launch the poll. And it'll be really great if you can respond to this. Some of the key things that I hear my clients talk about globally, right, is that either their processes are not really formalized to identify key risks. So, let me know if you can you respond to the poll? Is that available now? Just checking.
Okay, for those participants, you can definitely click on the poll icon at the bottom of the Zoom bar.
Okay, let me just, let me just relaunch poll. Okay, I think now they can respond. Right. You can see it, and if you can respond. So formal processes, one, real-time visibility. We talked about visibility, and there's a lot of supply chains that have visibility, but is it really real-time enough for you to make a change and respond to that risk? What about disruptions? How do you incorporate external disruptions like a port closure or an issue with the production side? How do you incorporate that into your supply chain strategy? That's another one. How can you determine the impact on your business? Yeah, we have a risk, but is it a small risk? Is it a big risk? Well, how is that going to impact my business? What about your capability as a team? Are you trained on how to take risks into account, your operations, and how to modify operations to mitigate that? And then, do you have mitigation activities already planned, right? So I see a lot of you have responded, right? I'll just give it another minute, and then I'll share the responses. I can see that a lot, about 40% or 20% of the participants don't have formal processes in place to identify key risks. I see that a lot of people don't have real-time visibility. 56% don't have real-time visibility. So I'll just give it one more minute. Any last participants responding? 65, okay, one more. I've just got one more. I'll end the poll just in the interest of time, and I'll share the results, right? So now you should be able to see the results. So as I was saying, 40% of the participants feel like there isn't enough formal processes in place, and 60% say there's limited real-time visibility, ability to incorporate disruptions into what's happening, that are happening in the external economy environment into your business. That's pretty good. Somewhat, the participants feel like they can make those changes in their business. They can. Most people agree they can identify risk, but can't determine the impact on business. That's like the 35%. Yes, team members are partly trained, but maybe not enough trained. And then the mitigation activities are not planned for key risks. So I do see there's a lot of areas for improvement as per the participants, and which makes sense, right? Because that's why you're here today. So let's walk through the next part of the presentation. So what you say is absolutely correct. A lot of supply chains have experienced at least one form of disruption in the past 12 months. We talked about tier 1 suppliers and tier 2 suppliers having issues. And then we've talked about governance to monitor global, supply chain disruptions has been a major issue as well, right? So what can we do, right? So that's a really good question. And whoops, let me just. So typically we use a framework, and it's not rocket science, right? It's actually understanding your supply chain better, and making sure that you have the right capabilities built into it, and then be able to launch mitigation activities. So we divide this into 3 parts: analyzing, sensing, and solving at IBM. So the first analyze is really understanding your supply chain assessment, assessing your supply chain, understanding how resilient it is, right? And I'll go into this a little bit more detail a little bit later, just to give you a few tips on how that can be done. And then once you understand where you are in your resiliency, building out the capability, right? So capability, there's multiple ways of doing that. I'll come to that again. Building digital twins, implementing supply chain control towers, linking up to external event management sort of systems, and I'll talk you through a little bit of that as well. Risk intelligence monitoring, so monitoring the risks in a very structured and rigorous way, and then seeing what impact that will have on your supply chain. And then, of course, having the operating procedures in place, right? If this happens, this is what I'll have to do. Having that in place, so that's step number 4. And then, of course, crisis management. There's a certain threshold for which you say, okay, now it's a crisis, and having that crisis management strategy in place. Who are the people who are going to get involved? What are they going to do? And how are we going to mitigate against that crisis, right? So that's the 5 steps. I'll walk you very quickly because in the interest of time, I do realize that we have a limited time. So I'll walk you through the first 3 steps and give you a little bit of tips on how that can be done. And then I'll also share some case studies of work that we've done with clients, especially in the advanced technology area. So how do we do the assessment? It's really understanding all the parts of the supply chain, and understanding key products that drive majority of revenue. It's always the 80-20 rule. You would have heard about that. You might have 1,000 products, but there's a certain number of products that are driving most of the revenue. Understanding those products and where the risks are associated with that. The suppliers, where are they? Where are the production sites for those products? You might do some of it, suppliers might do some of it, you might have contract manufacturing, etc. Your internal operations, and then logistics. How do those products travel, either from a raw materials part of the supply chain or from the end product? When you completed if you're a production company, you've completed your products, where does it go? Where does it get stored? Distribution centers, etc. Identifying that end to end, and looking at where, for those specific products that are driving the majority of the revenue, for those products, where are the critical gaps, right? So if I give you an example, one of my clients found out that for their main product that is, that drives about 15 to 20% of their revenue, one of the critical raw materials only had one supplier. So they had a sole supplier for a critical raw material that was part of their biggest product. And immediately they felt that is a supply chain risk for me. And so what do I need to do? I probably need to find a second or a third supplier in case the supplier has issues or disruptions, right? So those are the kind of things that you can do. And then, but if you want to do that, if these are the mitigation activities, I guess you need to understand how much is it going to cost, right? So why do we have one sole supplier? Typically, we have it because they probably have the best quality at the best cost, right? Or low cost, and you want to give all volume. This is our previous thinking. You want to give all volume to a particular supplier so you can aggregate the demand and get better pricing. But maybe in the future, that's not your strategy because of the risk profile. And therefore, if you do split out and you have multiple suppliers, that's going to drive up costs. And how much is that going to cost me? That's the whole business case, building the business case. I've just given one example, but of course, having multiple production sites, for example, could be another risk mitigation activity. Again, that's going to cost you. And therefore, it's making that informed decision as to this is a risk and this is going to impact X number of revenue. and this is the mitigation, and it's going to cost me X number, Y number. So, you know, making that business case and really doing a rigorous assessment. So there's no, you know, there's no secret to this. It's a rigorous analysis and identifying mitigation actions. We call, you know, doing all the scenarios, like what if this supplier went down? What if this port went down? What if this, you know, this production site went down? We call those scenarios, and we call it a little bit like war gaming, right, in supply chain, you know, looking at all the different scenarios and seeing what impact it would have on you as an organization. Next is the resiliency capability build out, right? So once you found out, okay, these are all my risk factors and this is my supply chain, how can I make my supply chain operations more receptible in the sense of ready to act, right? We've understood where the risks are, but we want to be ready to act when something happens. So again, digital twin, we call it digital twin, is like replicating your operations in the virtual format, right? And it sort of runs in a virtual environment. So anything that happens, you can actually apply it to your digital twin and see what reactions would be. That's something that large organizations are doing now. Control tower I mentioned, and I'll come to that again. How do we enhance visibility across the end-to-end? And also early warning signals, right? Systems. How do we incorporate some of these risks? So say, for example, Singapore has now, you know, has some restrictions, and maybe some of our products and services that we develop in Singapore are challenged because of the disruptions, the restrictions we are going through. Again, what does that mean to my business? And finding those early warning systems and responding to it is the other method. I've listed some other examples here. I'm not going to go through them today. You know, there are other ways we can also do this. The third one is the intelligence monitoring. So a lot of events are happening, and it's really impossible to do this in a manual way. There are things happening in Europe. Countries opening up, countries closing down. There are port issues. There are environmental issues. There's just too many risks that are happening on a daily basis, and it's impossible to do this manually. So you really need to have a way of incorporating these events into and taking those events and analyzing whether they're going to have an impact on you. So if there's a port closure, then understanding, do any of my products go through that port? And do any, so incoming, I mean, not only outgoing, incoming raw materials or outgoing finished product, do any of them go through that port? And if they do, how much of it and what impact is that going to have? Is it a 2-week delay? Is it a 1-month delay? You know, and what does that mean for my revenue? So really all of that is hard to do in a manual way. So we have to have a system of monitoring, which I'll come to again, right? So those are the 3 steps. I'm not going to go through 4 and 5. 4 is, you know, making sure you've got the operations procedures in place, so everyone knows what they have to do, roles and responsibilities, who does what, etc. if this happens. And then you have a crisis management team that you can mobilize very quickly if there is a major crisis. So now I want to talk about 2 case studies. One is building a supply chain. So I talked about, there's two parts, right, of building capability. One is internal capability, that is, how do I get more visibility in my supply chain? And one is the external visibility, which I talked about here. What are all the things, events that are happening, and how do I understand that impact on my supply chain, right? So there's 2 parts to it. So the first is, this is something that we have implemented at IBM across a number of organizations, right? It's really creating that control tower. And so, and people who have production type of companies, I mean, I know some of them are, some organizations are services orientated, but some also manufacture their own products. You'll see that end-to-end supply chain from materials to suppliers to logistics, inbound, manufacturers, warehouses, channels and distribution. So your distribution partners also are part of your supply chain, and then of course your end customer, especially nowadays, since we have a lot more B2C type of channel distribution as well. So across that end-to-end, how do we create visibility, right? And if you can see, there really is, we're launching advanced technology across end-to-end, right? We call it exponential technology. We're using blockchain for certain parts of that supply chain. We're using IoT for manufacturing sites. We're using advanced AI-powered decision-making tools so that we can have a look at our internal supply chain and monitor and make decisions fast, right? And make changes fast. That's number one. And so again, so the three parts which I talked about: sensing, analyzing, and solving. Sensing, again, this is again internally sensing what's happening in the supply chain, analyzing what that's going to do, having resolution rooms to, this is all advanced to communicate with different parts of the supply chain, regardless of where they're located, whether locally or regionally or even internationally, and then solving these, so having playbooks that show you how you can solve some of these issues, and lessons learned from previous disruptions. So that's from a technology perspective. I've shown a little bit of the technologies that we are using and how we can make it a lot more meaningful for the organization. So that was the first case study. We've implemented this a number of times, and organizations find it very useful to connect parts of their supply chain. I won't say that it's easy to do, because there's a lot of legacy systems. There's one organization we did this for, and they had over 30 systems across, or modules that they used across all their end-to-end supply chain. It is difficult. It does mean that we need to harness all the data from the different systems and create a single view of that data, which does it is a lot of effort, but then the advantages are really exponential by doing that. The other thing I wanted to show was the external event monitoring, right? Now, IBM themselves are manufacturers. We make servers, we make mainframes, and I think one of the things that we're proud to say is that during the last 1.5 years, there hasn't been a single delivery that hasn't been made on time and in full. So they've really been managing the risks very well for their own clients. And what we use is this product. It's embedded within our risk management systems. It's a product, we partner with Resiliency, a company called Resiliency. And what they do is all the hundreds and thousands of events that are happening out there, they detect what's happening there, and they link those events to your own supply chain. So they analyze it and see what the impact is on your supply chain. And then they confirm with the suppliers. If there's any suppliers, they actually confirm with them whether those suppliers are impacted by that event. And then they map it onto your own on your own supply chain, and then create actionable, like these are the things that are going to impact your supply chain, and what you need to do about it to fix it. So that's from a reactive event-based workflow, but they also have a predict and protect sort of workflow where they predict, some of the events that might happen and how that might impact on you. So I just wanted to show that it's a very complex tool, and we really don't have much time to go into it in a lot of detail, but it's really fascinating. I can show you some of the screens. Here we did this. So we not only IBM use it, but we've also implemented the same tool because obviously a lot of clients are requiring this similar sort of capabilities. So we have also helped clients implement this tool for them. So this is, again, the impact when something happens. If there's a shutdown in a production site, there's a fire or COVID-related restrictions, the impact is analyzed, and the suppliers that are impacted by that event is quickly confirmed with the supplier themselves. And then you can even chat and collaborate with the teams, with your internal teams and with the suppliers to see what you can do. There's active playbooks on how you deal with certain issues, and an event tracker. Again, all of this available almost real time and across, anywhere. So it's a mobile application that can, you can have on your phone. You can use on a real time basis. So these are some of the companies that are using this. So definitely a lot of organizations are seeing the value of monitoring risk. And as I said, this platform, monitors about 100,000 events on a weekly basis, right? So it's not insignificant. These are all the organizations that have implemented it so far and are using it to become a lot more resilient in their supply chain. So I guess with that, I'm sort of coming to the close. I did sort of rush it a little bit because I was thinking that we'll leave some time for questions. I think, as a supply chain professional, it's if you haven't already done it, and we saw the results from the polls, right? There's still a lot of improvement that can be done to supply chain. And I think now is the time, to get control of the current crisis and invest in the build out. This is the time to invest in the build out of more resilient supply chains. And it's a new normal. It's not going to go back to the old normal. So we need to be able to, be ready for anything that happens in the next, in the future. So now is the way to build that out. So knowing is not enough. We need to actually take action. A quote from Leonardo. So with that, I think I'll open it up to questions if there is any. So Afif, I'll hand back to you.
Yeah. So if you guys have any questions, please type it down the Q&A section that is provided at the bottom of the Zoom icon below. Yeah, we will wait for a few questions here. I think there are questions. Let me see. Okay, so maybe since while we are waiting for questions to come in, I do have a question. So, because resilience, having a resilient supply chain is, I don't know, like as a topic itself, it is very heavy. Not everyone would understand, the whole idea of like having the ability to respond in events of crisis. So from your point of view, what would you consider is a good resilient supply chain?
I guess what organizations are doing, are trying to do, I guess, in their business objective is to grow, right? Revenue growth is, of course, a key factor for everyone. And then also to protect their current revenue, right? So I would say if that is your business strategy, I think a good organization with a good supply chain resiliency program will be able to determine what is going to impact on that revenue in a very rapid manner, right? That is the business objective. Actually, the business objective is not to really say, hey, do I know whether this port is down? Or do I know, that all my containers costs are going up? I think that is not the objective. The objective is, yeah, that's good to know, but how is that going to impact on my revenue and my revenue growth? Because remember, at the end of the picture, it's the customers. You need to drive service levels with your customers and get their confidence in your products and services, right? So if they lose confidence, then your future revenue is impacted as well. Not only your current revenue, your future revenue as well. So I think a good resilient supply chain is knowing what can impact on their products and services that will directly impact on revenue and future growth.
Sounds like a very good answer. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So yes, I do have one question from Vinakaran, one of our participants. He asked, how can the leadership plan for resilient supply chain and what they need to take note of?
Yes, so planning is, as I said, it's that 5-step process, right? So planning is really about, making sure you understand your end-to-end, right? Building out the capability. And when I say capabilities, all these tools, right? You've got to have access to them. You've got to have access to the monitoring tools and those monitoring tools are not just monitoring events. They're monitoring those events and looking at what impact it'll have on you, right? If a supplier goes down and cannot produce in China, it might not be your supplier, but it may be, right? So it's actually that those tools actually identify the impact on your own supply chain. So that's really important. So building out, having access to that information and that control tower, putting those control towers in place, the visibility control tower that I talked about. I think that is what leadership needs to do, right? Have the capability within the organization to respond, because you can't expect the operational teams to be able to deal with this without the right tools, within their power, right? And what do and the second part is, what do they need to take note of? I think it's not an easy journey. And as I explained in the beginning, there may be costs involved as well. So you've got to make that cost benefit, analysis. This is what the risk is, and this is how it could impact me. And do I want to, implement these things at this cost to mitigate this? So that decision has to be made by the leaders, and it's not an easy process, I would say.
Okay. Does anyone else have any other questions?
Let me ask a question, Afif, to Kunta. It's such an excellent opportunity having her here. Kunta, thanks for a very robust process that you put out there, and a framework, basically for taking care of this. So as I mentioned earlier, this is really at the heart of many supply chain and logistics professionals. And for me, I've been in manufacturing, I've been in distribution and marketing for the longest time in my life. So I basically am very passionate about this particular issue. So the process you have down there is pretty good. Now, there are two things that I want to basically kind of pick your brains on. One is that now with that system that you have here, one of the most important things when you have complex situations like this, I think at the core of it, and I think you touch on it very well, is the visibility of the system. Correct. So visibility and very good, accurate, deep visibility is important, because you can't manage something without visibility, without knowing that something is happening or it has happened already, right? So that visibility is important, and therefore that those systems, leveraging technology especially, to be able to have digital twins, supply chain towers, and things like that, to have the visibility and then to know that it's happening, and therefore to take action, even if it is post-event, all right? That's still better than not knowing at all, and then when you and then you're completely down and say, oh no, yeah. So I think that is a very important part, and I totally agree with you. Visibility will be the name of game in resilience. To manage resilience, you need that, and it has to be real time if possible.
Yes.
Better still before. All right. Now the second point is that to know that before, then the sensing systems got to be very good, because you can have very good technology, you can have supply chain towers, but without good sensing, you don't know what's happening, right? And I think in here, besides having the tools, and I think you mentioned a very interesting tool, which I got to get deeper into it, Resiliency, right?
Resiliency, yeah.
Resiliency. So Resiliency, I think, is one fantastic tool that we could basically monitor for events, and maybe that also monitors the chats that is going on in the world, the conversations and things like that, to sense it. Now, in the case of pandemic and things like that, I think we already have some very good mechanisms in the world that censor these things, just that we got to find a way to link onto them. For example, Amazon knew about the pandemic way back in January 2020. They censored in their purchasing systems. Because the behavior of the world tells them, something is happening there, they're buying masks and stuff like that, medical stuff. And then there was another incident I read long time ago, when we had the Ebola case and also the SARS case. Google censored in their search system, and they are the best censors in the whole world. Basically, they know a lot of things actually better than all the health organizations, including WHO. All right. The only thing that we couldn't sense, basically are things like which are natural disasters. So, for example, earthquakes, tsunamis. Even our geologists and our seismologists is still grappling with that. So maybe those are the only things that we need some more time to get there to be able to sense those kind of things. So I think maybe in the framework itself, if we could kind of like link on to these people and encourage them to share their information. If Amazon had told us that, hey, something is happening, I think a lot of supply chains could have been saved, you know. That's one thing. I think we got to be able to draw them out, tap on to them. And then the last thing I think I want to also ask you, besides how we can get better sensing systems and tap on to these already good organizations that have got sensing in the world. The second thing is that I think with the system you have here is a very good system for managing and creating resilience. How can we teach this stuff? Because before they can have this process in place, they got to know how to do it. Learning changes everything. Right?
Yes.
So I'm very keen actually to bring out a kind of program to teach resilience, and then get on to processes like this, tools like this, you know. And what's your opinion? How could we actually help the supply chain and logistics professionals in this respect?
Yeah, so okay, there are very good points there, Patrick. So visibility, again, is very important, right? Knowing what's happening within your organization. And then the events you talked about, lots of organizations have, events. But to be honest, there's thousands of events happening every day, right? The global, the global economy is super complex, right? And there's of course hundreds of thousands of suppliers. I think the trick is, all these events are happening, but which events are going to impact me and my supply chain, right? So doing that link, and which is what this Resiliency product does, and we use it, IBM uses it ourselves. But it's not just having the product, having access to these events, it's actually doing the next step of linking it to your supply chain, right? It's this supplier, this country, and that is important to me, right? Whereas this other supplier in this other country, not important, I don't source from them. They're not a tier N-2, they're not a tier N-3 of my supply chain, right? So I guess that is really important, right? So making that link. And then your question about training, absolutely. I think that, and that was my step 2, right? So step 2, when I talked about resilience capability build out, capability for me is 3 things, right? One is having the technology, right? So these event-based tools, but that links up to your own supply chain. So having the control tower technology. The second thing is actually people capability, right? Training up the people. So you need to develop dedicated teams that are monitoring these risks and identifying how it's going to impact on your organization. Or actually, now, the tool that I showed you is an AI-driven tool. So it'll actually automatically analyze everything and say, hey, these are the top 3 events that are going to impact your supply chain. And, you're going to run out of this raw material because this supplier is down. And you've got inventory of X, and you're going to run out in like 2 weeks, right? So that's what the AI tool can tell you, AI-enabled tool. Now is, what are you going to do with that, right? Now, do I have a strategy in place where I go to another supplier, or do I change, my product in some way? Do I, move away from this kind of these products and move to another product portfolio? Those are the kind of things that we as supply chain professionals need to make decisions on, right? But you need a team that's monitoring and doing that stuff, and they need to be, trained up on that. And then the other thing is, when I talked about the capability, it's always 3 things, right? It's people, process, and technology, and then having the right processes in place. It's no point, if we come up with the greatest, we understand everything, but then we haven't got a process to actually implement it, right? So I would say those are the 3 things. And I agree with you, Patrick. The more awareness we generate, the more learning, I think the more resilient our supply chains will become, because we'll just apply it to our day-to-day work.
Yeah. Thank you, Kunta.
Yep.
So, I'm happy to, if anybody was interested in the Resiliency, I'm happy to do a demo or something, just to see how it works, right? Because it's really fascinating with all the nodes. It can, like, if I assess my supply chain, say I've got 100 suppliers, and 100 suppliers, their suppliers is probably 10 times, right? And they probably have at least another 100 suppliers, right? 100 times. So if I've got 100,000 suppliers in my network, right, it shows you that link. And if there is an event that's happening in this particular supplier, it shows you all the nodes that are impacted on my supply chain. So it's a really fascinating tool. And I'll be happy to
take you up on the offer. I think it's really great if you can do a demo on the the process and tools. I'm sure quite a number of us within the supply chain and logistics space will be interested. Really.
Yeah. Let's arrange for that, and I'm happy to take you through some live cases and see how it impacts on your supply chain and what you can do, right, to mitigate against that. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. So looking at the chat section here, there's no other questions. Okay, so maybe we can have we can end the webinar. Yeah. So let me share my screen, Kunta. Yeah.
Okay, let me stop sharing.
Okay. Okay. Okay, so with that, we have come to the end of the webinar. So let's put our hands together to thank our speaker for today, Kunta Selvanathan, Supply Chain Transformations Leader of IBM. Thank you so much, Kunta, for your time. We really appreciate it. Yeah, so before we end it,